Opening the midnight chime of death. Greenhaven had long since surrendered to sleep when the first chime shattered the silence. A single, low, metallic note drifted across the empty lanes, followed by another and another, until 12 solemn strokes echoed through the village like a funeral toll. It was impossible. The great long case clock in Sir Reginald Fairfax's library had not struck in years. Its pendulum hung lifeless, its gears long since stiff with dust. Yet tonight, as if summoned by unseen hands, it spoke again, marking midnight with eerie precision. Moments later, the scream came, not from the clock, but from within the manor itself. When the servants rushed in, they found him, Sir Reginald, the formidable patriarch of the Fairfax family, sprawled at the foot of the spiral staircase in the library. A pool of blood spread slowly across the flagstone floor, catching the flicker of candlelight. One hand still clutched the polished oak banister, gouged deep with fresh scratches, as though he had tried desperately to hold on. His pocket watch, his most prized possession, lay shattered several feet away, as if flung by some violent struggle. The police would call it an accident. A misstep in the dark, a frail old man losing his balance. Yet whispers traveled quickly through the corridors of Netherfield. A maid swore the candles had been burning moments before, only to be mysteriously snuffed out. Charles Fairfax, the heir, admitted he had heard raised voices in the library shortly before midnight. And in Sir Reginald's journal, the final page ended abruptly with a chilling line: "I know who plots against me." By morning, a sealed letter, its wax stamped in haste, had reached Miss Marple. She read it in silence, her sharp eyes narrowing. The words were few, scrawled in a trembling hand. "Miss Marple, come to Netherfield at once. A death has occurred, and it cannot have been an accident." Outside her window, the storm continued to rage, rain lashing the village streets. She folded the letter, her expression grave. Somewhere inside Netherfield Manor, among its endless corridors and shadowed staircases, someone was lying. And Miss Marple knew one truth above all others: lies never last long under the weight of time. Chapter 1. Netherfield Manor by daylight. The storm had passed by morning, leaving Netherfield wrapped in a damp hush. Mist clung to the rolling fields, and the ivy-strangled walls of the manor rose from the fog like some ancient sentinel. By daylight, it seemed almost serene, its windows reflecting the pale sun as though nothing sinister had ever crossed its threshold. But Miss Marple, stepping down from the carriage that had carried her through muddy lanes, felt the weight of unease as surely as the chill in the air. She had seen too many fine houses cloaked in charm while hiding rot within their walls. Netherfield was no exception. Lady Eleanor Fairfax received her at the great oak doors. Her black gown, though simple, was impeccably tailored. Her face was pale but composed, her eyes dry and watchful. There was dignity in her bearing, but also something brittle, as though the slightest touch might splinter her composure. "Miss Marple," she said softly, with a slight tremor that belied her calm. "Thank you for coming. This house is not what it was yesterday." Miss Marple inclined her head, her expression kind yet searching. "Grief changes a house, Lady Eleanor, but truth changes it more." They moved through the great hall where portraits of stern-faced ancestors stared down from gilded frames. The air smelled faintly of extinguished candles and cold stone. Footsteps echoed too loudly, as though the house itself resented the silence that had replaced its usual bustle. The library, scene of the tragedy, was barred for the moment. Yet the spiral staircase could be glimpsed from the doorway, its oak railing darkened by the stain of the night before. Miss Marple's eyes lingered there, sharp and thoughtful, before she turned away. Breakfast had been laid in the dining room, though no one had appetite. The family gathered in stiff formality, bound by blood but divided by unspoken suspicion. Charles Fairfax, the eldest son, sat at the head of the table in his father's chair, though the position seemed too large for him. His jaw was clenched, his fingers drumming restlessly on the polished wood. A man accustomed to command, yes, but also to being challenged, and perhaps resented for it. Beatrice, the youngest, kept her eyes lowered. Her delicate features were framed by dark curls, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. She seemed fragile, almost ethereal, but there was tension in her silence. A young woman with secrets she dared not voice. Edward Ashworth, the cousin, slouched in his chair with a glass of brandy, though it was hardly 9 o'clock. His face bore the haggard marks of sleeplessness, or perhaps guilt. He forced a smirk when Miss Marple entered, but it faded under her steady gaze. And in the shadows, Mrs. Dunlop, the housekeeper, oversaw the room with folded hands. Her loyalty was well known, her service to the family spanning decades, yet her eyes shifted too quickly, her lips pressed tight, as though she carried a burden she dared not speak. Miss Marple observed them all as she sipped her tea. In gatherings such as these, silence often spoke louder than words. Charles avoided Beatrice's gaze. Beatrice avoided Edward's. Lady Eleanor's calm masked an undercurrent of dread. And Mrs. Dunlop never once looked at the spiral staircase visible through the far window. After a strained meal, Lady Eleanor led Miss Marple to the small morning room. Rain dripped from the eaves outside, tapping against the glass like a metronome. "You've heard what the constable has said," Lady Eleanor began, her voice hushed. "An accident, a stumble in the dark. But I cannot—" Her voice broke for the first time, and she pressed a handkerchief to her lips. "I cannot believe it." Miss Marple's knitting needles clicked softly as she sat, already at work on a new pair of gloves. She looked up, eyes bright with quiet certainty. "You are right not to believe it, Lady Eleanor. Sir Reginald's death carries the mark of intent. A stumble does not snuff out candles, nor summon a clock that has been silent for years." Lady Eleanor shivered, though the fire burned warmly in the grate. "Tell me," Miss Marple continued, "who was in the library that night?" Lady Eleanor hesitated. "I cannot be sure, but Charles argued with his father earlier that evening. Edward had been drinking, as he often does. Beatrice. She was restless, wandering, and Mrs. Dunlop. She is always about, though I scarcely notice her presence anymore." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Invisibility, Lady Eleanor, can be the greatest disguise of all." A knock interrupted them. Charles entered, his face flushed. "Mother, Miss Marple, this questioning must end. Father's death was a tragedy, but raking through the family's grief will serve no one." Miss Marple looked at him kindly, yet her words were pointed. "On the contrary, Mr. Fairfax, grief buries pain, but lies, they bury the truth, and the truth always finds its way back." Charles's mouth tightened, but he said nothing more. He turned sharply and left, the door slamming behind him. Lady Eleanor's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "You see, Miss Marple, already the house trembles. We are bound together, yet torn apart. If you find the truth, you will save more than just his memory. You may save what little remains of us." Miss Marple set down her knitting and rose. She walked to the window where mist still curled around the manor's stone walls. The clock tower loomed beyond, silent now, its hands frozen at midnight. Her voice was quiet but resolute. "Then we must begin at once. For in houses like this, where every corridor carries whispers, time itself becomes the witness. And I intend to make it speak." Chapter 2. Death on the Spiral Staircase. The library doors creaked open at last. Constable Hughes had sealed them after the body was carried away, but at Miss Marple's quiet insistence and Lady Eleanor's weary authority, the family reconvened there in the pale light of morning. The room was vast, its oak-paneled walls lined with bookshelves heavy with centuries of leather-bound tomes. Dust motes floated in beams of light, yet the air smelled faintly of smoke and wax, as if the room itself still remembered the chaos of midnight. The spiral staircase rose at the far end, curling upward toward a gallery of books. Its polished oak banister gleamed, though at one section the varnish had been gouged away by fingernails desperate to hold on. Below, on the stone floor, faint discoloration marked where Sir Reginald had lain. Beatrice faltered as she stepped inside. "I can still hear it," she whispered. The crash, the silence afterward. Charles grasped her arm impatiently, but his own eyes darted nervously to the staircase. Miss Marple, small and unassuming, advanced with her usual steady pace. She touched the banister where the scratches marred the surface. Her fingers lingered, as though the wood itself might tell her its story. The force of a fall is brutal, she murmured, but these marks are not the marks of someone slipping. They are the scars of a struggle. Constable Hughes shifted uncomfortably. With respect, madam, Sir Reginald was an old man. Weak hands might scratch like that while he tumbled. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled gently. Perhaps, but weak hands do not gouge oak this deeply. Nor does a stumble snuff out candles with such convenience. She gestured to the candle holders fixed at intervals along the shelves. Several stood cold, their wax hardened into uneven pools as if extinguished in haste. One had dripped onto the floor, leaving a telltale splatter. Briggs, the inspector summoned from town, crossed his arms. You suggest foul play, then? I do not suggest, Miss Marple replied softly. I listen, and the room is speaking. Lady Eleanor shuddered and sank into a chair. If it was no accident, then one of us, Edward interrupted with a harsh laugh, the brandy already heavy on his breath, though the sun was scarcely above the horizon. Oh, let her spin her tales. My uncle was a stubborn old fool. Perhaps he stumbled over his own pride. Miss Marple regarded him with calm pity. Perhaps, but then why was his pocket watch found so far from his body? A hush fell. She stooped, indicating the flagstone floor where Hughes had marked the spot in chalk. The shattered watch lay more than 6 feet from where Sir Reginald had fallen. A man falling clutches what he holds. He does not hurl it away. Unless, she added, her voice tightening, it was torn from him during a quarrel. Charles muttered, This is absurd. You make phantoms from coincidence. But Beatrice's soft voice broke in. No. I heard voices, father's, raised in anger, and another, lower, rougher. Then the clock struck, the lights went out, and... She broke off, trembling. Miss Marple laid a comforting hand on her shoulder. Your honesty does you credit, my dear. Do not be afraid of what you heard. Truth hides in whispers. The inspector pressed. Whose voice, Miss Beatrice? Can you say? Beatrice shook her head, tears brimming. I don't know. I thought, perhaps Charles, but it was too dark, too quick. Charles slammed his palm on the table. I will not stand accused on the babbling of a frightened girl. Enough, Briggs barked. This is not a court yet. Still, suspicion hung heavy. Miss Marple moved quietly about the room, her eyes sharp. She paused by the shelves. One book jutted half-pulled, its leather spine cracked. She eased it free and held it up. A volume of Tennyson, she noted. Curious that it was drawn but never read. And behind it, she reached into the gap and produced a single glove, black leather, thin enough to fit a man's hand. Wax flecked its fingers. Edward blanched. That proves nothing. Anyone could drop a glove. Perhaps, Miss Marple allowed. Yet why hide it behind books? And why only one? Her gaze drifted upward to the clock on the wall. Its hands were frozen at midnight. Sir Reginald's death did not occur in silence. It occurred to the rhythm of time itself. A clock long stilled struck 12, though no one has wound it in years. That alone tells me this was not the hand of chance. It was the hand of design. Briggs frowned deeply. You mean the killer tampered with the clock? Miss Marple nodded. Someone used its chime to mask the struggle, to turn murder into an illusion of accident. The family exchanged uneasy glances. Lady Eleanor's face had gone gray. Charles looked ready to protest again, but his words stuck. Edward drained his glass with trembling fingers. And Beatrice, sweet, fragile Beatrice, whispered, Then he was killed, truly killed. Miss Marple turned to her. Yes, my dear. And now the house itself will yield the truth. We must listen carefully to what it is telling us. She straightened, her small frame seeming suddenly immense. Her eyes swept the family, one by one. Sir Reginald Fairfax did not fall alone. Someone here walked with him to the edge. The words rang like the echo of the midnight chime. Chapter 3, Secrets Within the Family. The storm had weakened by morning, but the air inside Netherfield felt heavier than the clouds outside. Inspector Briggs declared the family must be questioned one by one. The drawing room, with its high windows and ancestral portraits, became the stage where truths and lies would be spoken. Miss Marple, knitting softly near the fire, looked as harmless as ever, but her sharp eyes missed nothing. Lady Eleanor. Lady Eleanor entered first, dressed impeccably in morning black, a strand of pearls at her throat. She carried herself with composure, yet her hands trembled ever so slightly when she sat. "My husband was not careless," she said firmly. "He counted his steps as though they were coins. If he fell, it was not by chance." Briggs asked about the previous night. She recalled a cry, short, abrupt, then the chime of the long silent clock. "That clock has been dead since our wedding," she whispered. Its voice returned only as his life left him. Miss Marple's needles paused. "And he spoke of changes, did he not?" Lady Eleanor's lips tightened. "Yes, he said we must prepare, but he would not say for what." Charles Fairfax, Maxe. Her son Charles entered next, tall and severe, his tone defensive. "I quarreled with him about the estate. He wished to dismiss servants. I would not permit it. I left him after supper and walked in the garden, alone." "In the storm?" Briggs pressed. "Yes." Miss Marple lifted her gaze. "And the chime of the clock. Did you hear it from the garden?" Charles hesitated. "Yes, or perhaps I imagined it. It meant nothing." But Miss Marple noticed the twitch at his jaw. Men who fear time's strike rarely dismiss its sound. Beatrice Fairfax. Beatrice followed, pale and anxious. Her hands knotted in her lap. "I could not sleep. I wandered the gallery above the library. I saw candlelight, two shadows moving. Then the chime. The light went out. Silence followed." "Two shadows?" Miss Marple asked gently. "Yes. One tall, the other leaning close. I thought it was Father and Charles. I ran back to my room." Her eyes filled with tears. "I should have stayed. Perhaps I could have stopped it." Miss Marple shook her head kindly. "Shadows conceal guilt, my dear. They do not create it." Edward Ashworth last came Edward, the nephew. He slouched into the chair, his eyes bloodshot, his smile careless. "Of course I argued with him. He told me I was worthless. I left him near 11, went to my room, drank too much brandy, that is all." "And yet," Briggs said, "your glove was found in the library." Edward's smirk faltered. "Not mine. Anyone could have left it." Miss Marple tilted her head. "Not behind a half-pulled book, dear boy. That is where things are hidden, not dropped." Edward flushed, fists tightening. "I wanted him dead. I'll not deny it, but I did not kill him." The room grew silent once more. Lady Eleanor had spoken of a cry, Charles of a quarrel, Beatrice of shadows, Edward of rage. Each testimony contradicted another, like threads knotted in different patterns. Miss Marple resumed her knitting, her eyes glinting. "Inspector, have you noticed? They all remember the clock. Its chime bound them together last night. And yet not one can agree where they stood when it struck. That is the trouble with lies. They never keep proper time." Chapter 4. Testimonies and Contradictions. The drawing room at Netherfield seemed darker, though lamps had been lit. The portraits of long-dead Fairfaxes loomed over the gathering, their painted eyes stern, as if they too listened to the tangled words of the living. Inspector Briggs sat stiffly at the table, his notebook open, while Miss Marple occupied her usual place near the fire, the rhythmic click of her needles as steady as the rain outside. "Each of you," Briggs said firmly, "has given an account, but those accounts do not fit together. Tonight, we must press further." The cry in the night, Lady Eleanor spoke first. "I told you, I heard a cry. It was not long, only a sharp sound, as if breath had been struck away." Charles frowned. "I heard nothing of the sort. If such a sound echoed through the house, I would have known." Beatrice shifted uneasily. But I heard voices, raised voices from the library, then silence. And I heard my own shame, Edward muttered, eyes on the floor, my uncle's voice lashing me in my head long after I left him. Curious, Miss Marple murmured. A cry to some, voices to others, silence to one. And all of it bound by the chime of a clock that had been silent for decades. The family looked at her, startled, as though the old woman had plucked the thought from their collective mind. The garden alibi. Charles straightened, his jaw tight. I told you where I was, in the garden. The storm was nothing to me. But muddy prints were found in the West Passage, Briggs countered. Boot prints that lead toward the library, not the roses. Charles flushed. You accuse me because my boots are large. Many wear the same size. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. Yet the prints turned left at the corridor, toward the library door. Gardens rarely lie indoors. Beatrice gasped. Then it was you. Do not play the innocent, Charles snapped. You saw shadows, did you not? How convenient that you could not name them. Shadows and light. Beatrice clutched her handkerchief. I saw two figures, yes. One tall, one bent. I thought it was Father and you. Edward gave a bitter laugh. Perhaps it was Father and me then. Why not? Let us all take turns in the dock. Miss Marple spoke gently. My dear, when you saw the shadows, were the candles still burning? Beatrice nodded. Yes, they flickered, then went out. And yet, Lady Eleanor interjected quietly, when I entered later, the candles were tall, unburned, as if freshly set. The words dropped like stones in a pond. Candles that vanished, then reappeared, meant staging. Someone had arranged the room after the fall. The glove Briggs turned his gaze to Edward. And the glove, found behind the books. Your glove. Edward's face darkened. I swear, it is not mine. A trick, planted to damn me. Then who planted it? Briggs demanded. Edward hesitated, then muttered, Charles could have, or even Beatrice. She wanders like a ghost at night. Enough! Lady Eleanor rose, her voice trembling but clear. This family tears itself apart while Reginald lies cold. Is this what you want? To devour each other with suspicion? Miss Marple looked up calmly. Suspicion is not the feast, Lady Eleanor. Truth is. And truth sits at this table, whether we wish to dine with it or not. Miss Marple's observation. The fire cracked. The storm outside shifted. Miss Marple folded her knitting neatly into her lap and spoke with her usual softness, which carried farther than any shout. You all cling to pieces of the night, yet the pieces do not fit. A cry that some hear, others deny. A clock that chimed for all, yet none can agree where they stood when it struck. Shadows that danced, then vanished. Candles that burned low, then stood tall again. And a glove that hides itself behind books, as if ashamed to be found. She looked at each in turn. Charles's flushed defiance, Beatrice's pale fear, Edward's bitter rage, Lady Eleanor's rigid grief. Contradictions, Inspector, are not obstacles. They are signposts. And every signpost here points not to chance, but to design. Sir Reginald Fairfax did not stumble into death. He was led there, by hands that knew the house, by someone who rehearsed every step. Briggs shut his notebook with a snap. Then one of you in this very room is a murderer. Silence followed. It was not the silence of mourning, but of dread. Chapter 5. Clues in the library. The library at Netherfield was no ordinary room. Even by daylight it felt heavy, a cathedral of books where time had long since stopped breathing. The tall windows admitted only a weak light through layers of grime, and every corner seemed to hold its own shadow. When Miss Marple requested to revisit the place, the household gathered reluctantly. It was as though returning to the scene meant inviting the ghost of Sir Reginald back into their midst. Constable Hughes unlocked the doors. The hinges groaned, protesting the intrusion. The air inside smelled faintly of wax, leather, and something sharper, the metallic tang of death that clings long after a body has been removed. Miss Marple walked slowly, her small figure dwarfed by towering shelves. Yet her eyes, bright and precise, swept over every detail. She paused at the spiral staircase, resting a hand on the banister. The gouged wood still bore the story of desperate fingers. "Sir Reginald did not slip quietly," she murmured. "He fought, even as he fell." Briggs crossed his arms. "We've seen the scratches. What else?" Miss Marple tilted her head. "Sometimes, Inspector, we see too quickly and miss what lies beneath." She gestured for a candle to be lit. The flame quivered, casting fresh light on the shelves. Near the second row, one book jutted slightly forward, as though tugged in haste. She reached up, pulled it free, a well-worn volume of Tennyson. Dust clung to its spine, but the edge of its pages bore a faint smudge, as though touched recently. Behind the gap, something glinted. With delicate fingers, Miss Marple drew it out. A black leather glove, its tip speckled with hardened wax. Beatrice gasped. Edward cursed under his breath. Charles clenched his fists. "A glove hidden is not a glove dropped," Miss Marple said quietly. "It wanted to be forgotten." Briggs held it up. "This matches the description of Edward's, does it not?" Edward snapped. "It could belong to anyone. Why must suspicion fall on me at every turn?" Miss Marple studied the glove closely. Left hand only, a curious thing to lose in a quarrel. One clutches with both hands, unless the other was occupied. Her voice drifted, inviting the thought to settle in each mind. The wax trail. She set the glove aside and lowered her gaze to the stone floor. Kneeling, she examined the wax droplets near the base of the staircase. They were irregular, scattered as though shaken free in a struggle. She touched one gently, then held her finger to the light. The wax here fell while hot. It hardened where it struck cold stone. But notice, one droplet lies beyond the others, closer to the rug. Too far for an ordinary drip. It was carried on something, perhaps fabric, perhaps leather. Her eyes shifted back to the glove. Lady Eleanor drew a sharp breath. "Are you saying," Miss Marple cut in gently, "I am saying, the wax tells a story." A hand reached near the candle, then drew away quickly, carrying the molten wax with it. A hand wearing this glove. Briggs scribbled notes, his face grim. "So, the killer snuffed the candles deliberately?" "Yes, dear," Miss Marple replied. "Light extinguished at the moment of violence. Shadows made to confuse, and afterward, candles replaced, fresh and tall, to disguise the scene." The pocket watch. Near the chalk mark where the body had lain, Miss Marple crouched again. The shattered pieces of Sir Reginald's pocket watch had been gathered into a small tray. She lifted one fragment carefully. "This watch was prized," she said. "He kept it always in his waistcoat, yet here it shattered, far from his body. A man does not cast away his own watch while falling. It was torn from him, perhaps in a hand that sought to grasp at time itself." Briggs nodded. Another sign of struggle. Charles shifted uneasily. Anyone could have wrenched it free in panic. Father himself, perhaps, reaching out. "Perhaps," Miss Marple said softly. "Yet the chain broke clean, not worn. Steel snapped by force, not by accident." Her gaze lingered on Charles just long enough to draw sweat to his brow before she moved on. The silence after the chime. She rose, surveying the room as though piecing together a stage play. Two figures in candlelight. Words raised to anger. The chime of a clock long silent, striking at midnight for the first time in years. Candles extinguished. Darkness. Then, the fall. Beatrice whispered, "Yes, that is how it happened." "But," Miss Marple added, "what none of you noticed was the silence after." The clock struck once, then stopped. A single chime, forced by someone's hand. Edward scoffed. "You cannot prove that." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "No, but the mechanism tells me so. I examined it this morning. It had not been wound in decades. A single gear was pushed forward, one chime and nothing more. A perfect signal, staged to mark the moment. The family stared, horrified. The conclusion. Miss Marple folded her hands over her knitting bag. This was not accident, nor was it rage alone. It was theater, carefully arranged. Someone lured Sir Reginald here with the promise of words or documents. Someone chose this room for its shadows, its silence, its stage. And when the clock chimed, it was not time itself speaking. It was the murderer. Lady Eleanor closed her eyes. Beatrice's hands trembled. Charles paced like a caged animal. Edward drank deeply from his flask. Briggs snapped his notebook shut. We have motive, means, and deceit. What we lack is confession. Miss Marple's eyes, sharp as glass, scanned the family one by one. Confession comes, Inspector, when the liar's web entangles itself. And already, threads are fraying. Chapter 6, The Hidden Letters. The storm had finally broken by dawn, leaving Netherfield under a pallid sky. The air smelled of wet earth and old wood, but within the manor, the tension clung thicker than fog. Inspector Briggs was impatient for results, yet Miss Marple asked for a quiet hour in Sir Reginald's study. She knew that men who guard secrets often leave them not in the open, but where their hands fall most naturally. The study was lined with dark oak panels, shelves sagging with ledgers and correspondence. Dust coated most surfaces, save for the great desk that dominated the center. Its drawers were neat, almost obsessively so. Papers aligned, pens polished, a place for everything. Too neat, Miss Marple thought. The neatness of a man who feared others prying into what lay beneath. She ran her fingers gently along the underside of the desk. A faint ridge caught her touch. With surprising strength, she pressed inward and a narrow panel shifted with a click. A hidden compartment. Inside lay a bundle of letters, bound with frayed ribbon. The paper smelled of damp and age. Miss Marple unfolded the first sheet with careful hands. The first letter. The script was unmistakably Sir Reginald's, strong and clipped. To my solicitor, it is my wish that Netherfield and its revenues no longer serve the idle comfort of my family alone. I intend to establish a trust for the preservation of education and the poor. Draft a new will accordingly. R.F. Miss Marple pursed her lips. A change of will. No wonder his household was restless. To redirect the fortune away from children and heirs, such words were enough to sow seeds of desperation. She read further. The bundle of secrets, letter after letter, confirmed his intent. Reginald had written not once in passion, but many times over months to finalize the arrangement. One page, half crumpled, bore words more revealing. My children think me a tyrant. Edward despises me. Charles challenges me. Beatrice fears me. Eleanor endures me. Perhaps they are not wrong, yet I cannot trust them with what Netherfield holds. Better it serve the village than vanish into weak or greedy hands. Miss Marple folded the sheet carefully. The lines carried not only resolve, but fear. Reginald had known his decision would not be accepted. The final letter was dated the very morning before his death. It instructed the solicitor to prepare the new will by week's end. Sir Reginald would sign it in private. Revelation to the inspector, Inspector Briggs, entered as Miss Marple laid the letters upon the desk. His brows rose. Well, have you found more knitting yarn? Letters, Miss Marple said simply, sliding them toward him. Letters that alter the shape of every motive in this house. Briggs scanned quickly, his lips tightening. Good Lord. If this is true, none of them would inherit as they expected. Charles, Edward, Beatrice, disinherited in favor of charity? That is cause enough for rage. Cause, Miss Marple agreed, is not the same as guilt, but guilt wears cause like a mask. Briggs tapped the last letter. So one of them killed him before he could sign it. Perhaps, Miss Marple said, her eyes narrowing. But look closer. He speaks of secrecy. He knew danger pressed close. That is why he hid these letters. The question is, who else knew where to look? Family tensions exposed. Later that morning, Miss Marple quietly observed the household as they gathered for breakfast. She said nothing of the letters, but her watchful eye noted every glance. Charles sat rigid, his jaw set as though chewing bitterness. Beatrice avoided everyone's gaze, staring into her tea as if it held omens. Edward poured brandy into his coffee, muttering that life was a joke played at his expense. Lady Eleanor moved with practiced grace, yet her hand lingered protectively on her pearls, the gesture of a woman steeling herself against a blow yet to come. Miss Marple spoke lightly, as if in passing. Sir Reginald was always a man of duty, was he not? A man who placed principle above comfort? Charles snorted. Principle? He ruled with an iron ledger. Comfort belonged only to him. Beatrice whispered. He meant well. Edward slammed his cup down. Meant well? He meant to leave us penniless. Don't pretend you didn't hear the rumors. Lady Eleanor's spoon clattered against her saucer. Silence fell. Miss Marple smiled faintly. The truth, like steam, escapes where the pot is weakest. They knew. At least some of them had suspected the change of will. That suspicion had been enough to sharpen anger into fear. Miss Marple's deduction. Back in the study, she stood again before the spiral staircase. She pictured the night. Sir Reginald lured here with the promise of discussion, the letters perhaps already discovered or demanded. A quarrel, a struggle. The chime of the clock, a staged signal. The fall. She spoke softly, almost to herself. He was not killed for who he was, but for what he planned. And only those who stood to lose everything would strike so desperately. Briggs looked up sharply. So, one of his heirs. Perhaps, Miss Marple said. Or perhaps one who feared being left with nothing at all. Her gaze lingered on the hidden compartment. The ribbon that bound the letters was frayed, as though it had been untied recently. Someone had found them before she had. Someone had known. Closing the net. As the afternoon dimmed, Miss Marple laid the letters gently into her bag. She did not share them with the family. Not yet. Evidence had more value when revealed at the right moment. Instead, she sat once more in the drawing room, knitting quietly, her mind sharper than any needle. The Fairfax family whispered among themselves, glancing at her as though the old woman was a specter. She smiled benignly, but her thoughts were fierce. The letters had not only revealed motive, they had narrowed opportunity. Only one among them had both reason to fear the will and knowledge of where to find its secret. Miss Marple knew that soon, very soon, the truth would surface. For lies, like damp in old walls, always find their way to the light. Chapter 7. The night reenactment. The storm had returned with the evening, as though the skies themselves conspired to darken Netherfield Manor. Thunder rolled in the distance, lightning spilled briefly across the hills, and rain lashed the windows with impatient fingers. Inside the library, however, the storm felt closer. The family gathered reluctantly, summoned not by Inspector Briggs's authority, but by Miss Marple's calm insistence. The great chamber was arranged exactly as it had been the night of Sir Reginald's death. Candles burned in sconces, their flames flickering nervously against the shelves. The spiral staircase loomed, its shadow twisting upward like a dark question mark. On the mantel, the long case clock stood silent, its pendulum lifeless, but its chimes still echoing in memory. Miss Marple sat in her accustomed chair, knitting on her lap, though she had not lifted a needle since they entered. Inspector Briggs stood stiffly nearby, notebook in hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," Briggs said, his voice echoing against the paneled walls, "we gathered tonight not to honor Sir Reginald, but to uncover the manner of his death. Miss Marple believes the truth can only be revealed by returning each of you to the scene. You will speak, move, recall, and we will watch." The family shifted uneasily. Charles crossed his arms, his broad frame blocking the firelight. Beatrice sat pale and rigid, eyes darting toward the staircase. Edward lounged with forced nonchalance, though his flask trembled as he lifted it. Lady Eleanor remained composed, but the pearl necklace at her throat gleamed too brightly. betraying a hand that had polished it again and again through the day. The setup, Miss Marple's voice, calm and steady, broke the silence. "We shall begin, if you please, by restoring the sequence of that night. The quarrels, the shadows, the chime, the fall. Let each of you take your place as you claimed in your testimony, and then let us see where truth and memory part ways." Charles scowled. "This is absurd, parading us about like children in a play." "Yet it is a play," Miss Marple replied softly. "A play performed in darkness, with Sir Reginald cast unwillingly as its victim. We are merely watching the curtain rise again." Reluctantly, they complied. Charles stood near the hearth, arms folded. Beatrice ascended to the gallery, looking down nervously as she had described. Edward leaned against a shelf, smirking faintly, though his eyes betrayed unease. Lady Eleanor remained by the door, her figure poised yet tense. The chime inspector Briggs nodded to Constable Hughes, who gave the clock's mechanism a sharp push. From deep within its wooden body, the gears groaned. Then, bong! A single chime rang out, low and hollow, filling the chamber with dread. Beatrice gasped, clutching the railing of the gallery. "Just like that night," she whispered. Charles shifted, his jaw tightening. Edward flinched, though he tried to disguise it with a laugh. Miss Marple rose slowly, her small figure somehow commanding the room. "Do you notice? The chime alters each of you. It is the one sound you cannot lie about. For lies keep poor time." The shadows recreated. She lit a fresh candle and handed it to Edward. "Stand as you did when last you quarreled with your uncle." Edward took it reluctantly, holding it high. His shadow stretched long across the wall, bending with the shelves. "Now," Miss Marple said, "Pas, another figure must have stood with him. Tall, broad." She turned her eyes on Charles. Charles bristled. "You would have me play villain in your pantomime?" "Only play yourself, Mr. Fairfax," she replied gently. Charles hesitated, then strode forward. His shadow loomed beside Edward's, just as Beatrice had described from the gallery. Two figures in flickering light, one tall, one leaning closer. Beatrice shuddered. "Yes, that is what I saw." "But the candles went out," Miss Marple continued. "Someone extinguished them in the struggle, and when they were relit, new candles stood fresh and tall. Tell me, Charles, did you fetch those candles?" Charles's eyes narrowed. "No. Why should I?" Miss Marple's voice sharpened. "Because you were the last to leave this room before the commotion. The servants confirm it. You told them to bring no light, that you would manage. And so you did. The glove and the wax." She gestured to the table where the black glove lay under glass. This was found behind a half-pulled book, wax hardened upon its fingers, wax that matches the trail upon the stone floor. Edward growled. "I've told you, it's not mine." "Indeed," Miss Marple said, "it is not yours. The stitching differs from your set, the size broader. No, this glove belonged to another." Her eyes fell on Charles. "To you, sir." Charles's face darkened. "A lie." "And yet," she continued, "the wax tells the tale. A hand seized the candle, struggled, tipped it. Wax fell, hardened, and the glove, snatched off in haste, was thrust behind the book. Hidden, but not well enough. The watch. She crossed to the tray where the fragments of Sir Reginald's pocket watch lay. This too speaks. Torn from his waistcoat, flung aside, but not by Edward, whose build is slighter, whose strength is less. No, this was the work of stronger hands, hands that matched the gouges on the banister where Sir Reginald fought to hold on. Her gaze locked on Charles. He shifted, sweat beading his brow despite the chill. "You twist shadows into ropes to hang me, old woman. Where is your proof?" The final revelation. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "The proof lies not only in objects, but in words. You told us you were in the garden. Yet the mud prints in the West Passage betray you. You said you heard nothing of a cry, yet your sister heard it from the gallery. And most damning of all, you dismissed the chime as nothing. But I tell you, Charles, you did not hear it faintly from the garden. You heard it as it rang beside you here, when you forced the gear yourself to signal the moment had come. Charles's face blanched. That is madness. Then let us test, Miss Marple said calmly. She motioned to Hughes. The constable pressed the gear again. The chime rang once, echoing through the room. Miss Marple turned to Beatrice. My dear, from the gallery, did you see who touched the clock? Beatrice trembled. Yes, a tall figure. I thought it was father, but now it was Charles. Silence fell heavy as stone. The collapse, Charles staggered back, his bravado crumbling. He would have destroyed us all. Given Netherfield to strangers, what right had he to disinherit his blood? Briggs stepped forward, hand on his cuffs. So you admit? I admit nothing, Charles roared. His eyes darted wildly, searching for escape. Then his voice broke. He called me weak, said I had no vision, no worth, that he would erase me with the stroke of a pen. I could not let him. He sank into the chair, his head in his hands. I only meant to frighten him, to make him see. But when he slipped, when he fell, his voice dwindled into sobs. Lady Eleanor turned away, pearls rattling at her throat. Beatrice wept softly, torn between horror and pity. Edward drained the last of his flask, his face pale. Miss Marple sat once more, her needles clicking faintly. The truth, Inspector, was never far. It only waited for the clock to strike again. Chapter 9, Epilogue, The Last Secret of Netherfield. The manor seemed quieter after Charles was taken away, though the silence was not peace but exhaustion. Rain still pattered against the windows, yet the house breathed differently. Like a patient who had survived a fever but would never be the same again. Miss Marple, walking with her usual unhurried step, asked for a final moment alone in Sir Reginald's study. Inspector Briggs agreed, though he shook his head. I don't know what more you hope to find, ma'am. We have confession, motive, and proof enough. Confession is not always the end, Miss Marple replied softly. Sometimes it is merely the closing of one chapter. The next begins with what is left behind. The hidden drawer, in the study, the storm's light filtered gray through the curtains. Miss Marple moved to the desk once more, fingertips brushing along its surface. She knew the letters had revealed the will's alteration, but Sir Reginald had written with a man's pride, not a man's heart. And hearts leave traces where reason cannot. She pressed at a second panel beneath the drawers. With a faint click, a smaller compartment sprang open. Inside was a single envelope sealed in red wax, addressed not to solicitors, but to Lady Eleanor. Miss Marple hesitated only a moment before carrying it to her. The letter to Eleanor. Eleanor sat by the fire, her pearls now dull in the dim light. She broke the seal with trembling fingers. Her eyes scanned the words, then filled with tears. My dearest Eleanor, she read aloud, voice faltering. If you find this after I am gone, know that my decisions were made not out of disdain, but of fear. I feared what ambition might do to Charles, what despair might do to Edward, what frailty might do to Beatrice. I sought to protect them by leaving Netherfield to causes that could not be corrupted. But I have also left provisions for each of them, hidden in trust, that they may live without ruin. Forgive me for seeming harsh. My love was clumsy, but it was love all the same. The letter slipped from her hand. For a moment, the room was filled with a silence deeper than grief. Miss Marple's reflection. Beatrice whispered, He did love us, in his way. Edward, sober now, muttered, And in his way, he destroyed us. Miss Marple picked up her knitting again, her needles clicking softly. Love and pride often walk too close together. Sir Reginald wished to guard you from yourselves, but in guarding, he closed his fist too tightly. And when we close our fists, what we hold often breaks. She folded the letter and placed it gently back into Eleanor's lap, the last secret. The truth had come too late to save Charles from his own fury, too late to save Reginald from the stones at the base of the staircase. But it offered something, however faint, to those left behind. An answer to the question that haunted them. whether he had ever cared. Eleanor pressed the letter to her chest. Beatrice wept silently. Edward turned away, but his shoulders shook. Inspector Briggs cleared his throat awkwardly. The law will take its course, but perhaps the house will rest easier now. Miss Marple looked toward the rain-streaked window. Houses do not rest, Inspector. People do. And rest comes only when the truth is faced, not hidden in drawers. Closing as she left Netherfield the next morning, the storm clouds parted at last. Sunlight touched the manor's old stones, but its shadow remained long across the lawn. Miss Marple walked away with quiet certainty. Another household, another web of lies untangled. Yet she knew the world was wide and secrets never ceased. For now, Netherfield's last secret had been spoken. But somewhere else, another clock was ticking toward midnight, another cry waiting to pierce the silence. And when it came, Miss Marple would be there.